Okay, I'd like to welcome Kiz Crosbie on the very first Creative Collective podcast. Hi, Kiz.
Hey, very first. I'm honoured.
Very first, yes. This is all new, so this is a bit of an experiment as well as being a nice opportunity to chat with you under very unusual circumstances. It's been a rather bizarre week, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That is absolutely the right description. I think the word that people keep using that sticks with my mind is surreal. I feel like we're all having a collective dream or hallucination that we're all going to wake up from at some point. At least that's what I'm hoping for.
I hope so too. Let me just start by asking you a little bit about who you are and what you do. So because I know you through the Mortal Fools drama group, but there's probably a backstory that takes you up to your being involved in that. Tell us a little bit about you and your creative journey. My
creative journey. Okay, so I guess when I was at school, I always liked the creative subjects. I've always kind of been creative. I used to sing a lot at school. That's a real passion of mine, still is, even though I don't get to do it very much. And was in the school choir and so on, and was in a couple of school shows, but was just, the small parts in the background. But I never really considered doing it for a career, I suppose, at that point. And then after I'd done my A-levels, I decided actually that is what I really, really wanted to do. And so I ended up staying on at sixth form college and doing a BTEC in performing arts. So I was at sixth form for another 2 years. And following that was lucky enough to get into, what is now the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. I have to try and remember that now. Mm-hmm. So did a degree there, and my degree was this is a bit of a pattern with my career, I suppose. It's changing my mind as I go along, really. But I'm a strong believer in you don't have to stick with something just because you've said that you're going to do it necessarily, particularly if it's not working for you. Life's too short for that. So the first course that I got into do at Central was a theatre practice degree, and I was doing stage management. And while I did enjoy that to a point, I didn't want to keep doing it forever, and was lucky enough to be able to transfer onto the drama and education degree, which was so much more up my street. It was just a mixed bag, really. So we did everything there on placement. It was a really placement driven course where I was able to do some TIE in a primary school, and this was all in London. So that was working in East London at the time. I went over to Kenya and did a placement with an organisation called Bubajika Puppet Show. Oh, right. And I was there for 3 months, which was a bit insane, to be honest.
What was your role in that?
What was my role?
Yeah.
A bit of everything, to be honest. So we didn't really plan it. It was basically, can I come out and work with you? And I'm going to be there for 3 months. And they were really excited about that. But what I ended up doing while I was there was everything from clowning at kids' parties. My overriding memory of that is a little girl who had very little contact with white people at that point. And I had a wig on at the time, and my hair was blonde at the time as well. I pulled this wig off that was purple or something, and all the kids kind of gasped because I had this blonde hair, and they'd not seen blonde hair before at that point. But one of the girls came up and chatted with me afterwards, and I really remember her coming up and like pinching my skin and saying to me, "When are you going to take that off so I can see what you really look like?" And it just blew my mind at the time. And I suppose that's one of the reasons that course was so good, because it just opened my eyes to lots of different possibilities. And then the first job that I got out of drama school was in the education department at a live theatre in Newcastle. Right. So that was the job that really kicked off my career and got me really interested in working with children and young people. So I did a lot of work within the youth theatre and projects that went out into schools. And that was really exciting to do that, and to do that in a theatre building that was also producing for the general public. That was really exciting.
When was that?
Oh, when did I do that? I started at live theatre in 2003. Right. And was there till 2006. and that was good. It was a good job, but I think I kind of outgrew it. I wanted something new. I wanted some new challenges. I was the theatre manager at People's Theatre in Heaton for 6 months or so, which was not a job for me, really. It was too administrative and not really what I wanted to be doing, but it was, you know, it was a good experience.
Yeah.
And then I had a really lovely stroke of good fortune where I got headhunted by the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Wow.
Where it's a lovely thing to be able to say that, really. I'd done a few education projects with them as part of my job at Live Theatre, and so had some contacts there. And we were just having a meeting, and I'd mentioned the fact that the job at the People's, as it wasn't really working out as I wanted it for me. And they said, and to quote, "Well, we've got a job if you're interested." I kind of was just, okay, all right. And long story short, moved down to the West Midlands. So the job was based in Stratford. But it was really exciting for me because at that point it was looking after the education programme alongside the residency that the RSC did in Newcastle every year. And it allowed me to keep my links with Newcastle, which is what I wanted and really where I wanted to be in the longer term. So that was really good. And then that job came to an end. They did a big reshuffle. They they stopped doing the residency, and that brought that particular job to an end. And that kicked off me going freelance, which, whilst that wouldn't have been my ideal choice, and I won't deny it was really scary at the time, ended up being like the best thing ever.
So your approach to going freelance, how, you know, obviously it's kind of in at the deep end when you go freelance. How did you approach finding work?
Well, the landscape was quite different at the time. So creative partnerships was sort of in its heyday at that point. So there was a lot of work available. So really it was reaching out to any contacts that I'd made through the industry in the various jobs that I'd had up to that point, and looking for leads. Unfortunately, once I got a good in with creative partnerships and understood that network and knew where to look for jobs and where things were being advertised at that time, that was a really great leg up for me, and I got a fair bit of work out of that. I think what was really different then was when I moved back up to the Northeast, which was in 2011. Obviously the economic crash had happened by that point. And it was lovely in one sense. I came back and was greeted with a lot of, "Oh, well, it's lovely to see you. We're really pleased that you're here, but we're protecting all of the people that we work with at the moment, so we don't really have any work." So I guess I would continue the work that I did connecting with people and making a little bit of a pest of myself, if I'm honest, just knocking on people's doors and not being shy to go, "Okay, I'm still here. Can we meet?" Just making sure I was in people's minds. But then the other side of it was, okay, well, what can I create for myself? What can I make happen? And actually it was that opportunity that has led to the inception of Mortal Fools as it is today.
Okay, so when you were doing this freelance work, I assume you were doing lots of different types of work. What sorts of things were you doing, and what was the ideal thing that you were looking for?
Oh, God. There was definitely not an ideal.
Right.
I don't even know what that is. I still don't know what that is, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was more thinking, looking out for opportunities and thinking, right, can I do that? And if I'm not quite sure, am I brave enough to figure out whether I can in the midst of doing it?
Yeah.
So some of the things I was doing at that point, God, it's funny casting your mind back, isn't it? So I taught a creative writing course for adult learning and skills for Northumberland County Council. That meant driving up to Rothbury once a week with a lovely cohort of what was largely sort of older ladies doing this lovely course. So that was fun. I started doing some training for businesses with Northern Stage. So it was a lovely opportunity, actually. So Erica Wyman, who used to be the artistic director there, she used to run a Shakespeare segment for this adult training communications workshop that they did. And I just got a phone call one day, I think because they knew that I'd done quite a lot working with the RSC and stuff, so was fairly competent in Shakespeare stuff, to say, could you come and sub for her? Because we've got this session and she can't do it. And actually that then led to doing that again and doing that again and doing that again. And it made sense for her in the role that she had to step back from that kind of delivery, and actually then created an opportunity for me. So that was great. And then I guess in the early days of what is now Mortal Fools, again, it's about being opportunistic, a little bit entrepreneurial. So I was looking at some publications that have come through our door, like my house, from the parish council, and they'd done some research into what young people wanted locally,
right.
That wasn't already available, and drama had come up quite highly on that list, and so this was them publishing the results of their survey. Mm-hmm. So I got in touch with them and said, right, well, I do this and maybe I could run something. So they gave me 100 quid or something like that to help kick it off. I know. Right. And I used the local parish hall, but I thought, right, I've got to call this something so that it's not just some random woman in a village hall running something. And I called it Time Valley Youth Theatre, and got some flyers printed, stuck them through doors, to invite some young people to come to taster sessions, and 40 young people signed up for those two taster sessions. Great
response, actually, isn't it?
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah. I was completely bowled over and a little bit scared, if I'm honest, because it was a bit like, oh God, I was expecting, a nice tidy half a dozen and it will all be very neat. But yeah, it was, I think it was a whole combination of different things that I was doing, because I needed to earn money. I also had a young child at the time, so my daughter was 1 at that point. So I had her that I had to think of and look after. So it was a huge juggling act. Mm-hmm. But I think as a freelancer, it was jumping in at the deep end, but it was really looking for those opportunities that were available from other people, but also looking for opportunities you could create for yourselves and then ultimately for other people.
Yeah. And during that time when you were setting these things up, what was your creative drive? What was the thing that you thought, it would be great if I could do this creatively? How would you like to have created, your own self-expression at that time?
I think the thing, like, I've always been fascinated with people. So I think it's the exploration of that is the thing that excites me. So it's taken me off into learning about psychology and sociology and all of those sorts of things as well. And I think what probably drew me to theatre in the first place, I remember very vividly having an experience when I was probably 10, I would guess. And I went to see Phantom of the Opera in London, and it was a sort of it was a family's trip for the company that my dad worked for at the time. And so we all got on a coach and we went off down to London, and we saw Phantom. And the thing that really struck me was this moment of sitting up in the really cheap seats with the little binoculars that you can get, and watching this scene where they're in the basement of this mansion and they're on a kind of gondola, and it's all dry ice effect to create this sort of underground river, and having this profound moment of going, I know that's not real, and yet it's still making me feel something. And that, I think, was the moment where I went, oh, like, what is that? And how do we create that? And I think if I think about what has become the way I like to make theatre and the theatre that excites me, it is those things. It's the things that you go, how can we bridge that thing of going, I know this isn't real, I know this is fiction, I know these people are performing, and yet it is affecting something real in me. Mm-hmm. That's been the thing that I think has been, I can see that as a thread running through all the theatre I've made with any group ever.
Yeah. Thinking about Mortal Fools, one of the things that I notice about the way that you work is the group that you're working with devise the piece, and it's very democratic, and you're not imposing necessarily ideas on that group. Has that always been the way that you've worked, and how did that come about?
I think that it almost became a practice by accident almost, before we became conscious of it as a way that we were working. For me personally, I've always been aware of the fact that I don't necessarily have all the best ideas in the room, and that's okay. And so working with young people especially, they just illuminate things for you that you would never have got to by yourself. So I remember with Mortal Fools, the first show that we did was called A Mad Hatter, A Serious Matter. And it was based on Alice in Wonderland. And what I wanted to do was take something that I think there's some real creative potential in this, that we could go where we could go with it, but I have no idea what that's actually going to be. And that's for us to discover jointly. And I think personally, and in my own artistic practice, it's that process of discovery that I think is so exciting, where even when I've maybe had a bit of an idea in my mind of like, oh, it could be this, or oh, it could be that, it's really interesting to get to the end of that process and look back and realize just how naive those ideas seemed, or how simplistic they seemed. And that process of that co-creation is something that has become the kind of the core of the way that Mortal Fools works. So I think it's been there inherent in my own practice for a long time, although I'm not sure I had the name for it. Now we've got the name for it, we can be much more deliberate in the way that we're working, and develop expertise in that way of working, so that the way that we're bringing everybody on board to create together is getting more and more sophisticated.
And I suppose with theatre, you've got a lot of creative disciplines that all come together in one thing, because you've obviously got your dramatic element, but you've also perhaps got sound and music and design, stage design, costume design, lighting design, those sorts of things. How much of an input do you have in all of that, or do you have a team of people who, give you the ideas? How does that all work?
I guess it varies really, but I think the way that we want to work, I suppose, is that everybody contributes. So we worked quite hard a number of years ago to put together 4 core values for the organisation, and they become the way that we benchmark how well we're doing. And what's interesting is that even though we're a theatre company, we made the decision that we wanted to have a kind of human value, and that theatre and drama were the ways to achieve kind of better lives for all of the people that are interacting with the company. So the first of those values is contributing, and it's the whole idea that everybody's contribution, everybody's ideas not only matter, because you can say that but not necessarily act on it, but that actually we're putting in place systems, ways of working and practice that embody that as well. And that even if that means, do you know what, hold the fort, this way that we thought we were heading, now that this idea has come in, or now that this perspective has come in, we need to pause and rethink entirely, so that even if that idea comes from, Johnny 9-year-old who's never done drama before, and it's his very first project, that we recognise when those ideas are shared, that we're creating a space whereby they can be shared, and that we then critically act on them when they are. So as well as how that applies to, the 9-year-old, that's the same with all of the artistic practitioners that we work with. So the teams have progressively been getting bigger and bigger for Mortal Fools projects, which is really exciting. So like you say, it's the theatre designers, it's the graphic designers. We've had a sound designer working on our latest show, which sadly has had to be cancelled. I'm sure we'll get onto that subject in a minute. And then a whole team of technicians with different expertise, stage managers, assistant directors, dramaturgs, just a whole amazing creative melting pot of expertise and ideas and perspectives. And what that does is it means that we're all constantly going through a CPD process, which is exciting for enriching the practice of everybody involved. But it means that the artistic outputs, the shows that we're making, they're improving in terms of their quality and their sophistication, and the technology that we're using, all of those different things. And that's just really exciting, I guess, exciting way to work.
Thinking about your creative development then over the last few years doing this work, what would you say were some of the things that you've learned or picked up that might be transferable to people who work in other creative areas? Are there any approaches or any creative lessons that you think that might be useful to someone who's a visual artist or a dancer or whatever else?
It's interesting you should say that, actually. It's hard to kind of pick out individual creative lessons, I suppose. But one of the pieces of work that we've got in development at the moment is looking at our delivery practice, but from a human to human perspective. So looking at the relational side of the delivery practice as opposed to the artistic side. The reason for that, I suppose, is because we've discovered over the years that people tend to put a lot of work into developing their artistic skills. And so they'll come to us and go, and sort of already have that, and that's an ongoing process. And they feel quite confident, I suppose, in their own art form quite often. But when you're working, particularly in a participatory setting, but in any setting, it's that relational side that allows you to work in a co-creation context, that allows you to collaborate well. Those relational skills are often some of the things that are less developed in some of the people that we're working with. And certainly that we've recognized that those people, even like myself, even that have been in the team for a long time, they're things that have to be developed alongside the artistic in order to create the best work if you want to work collaboratively. So I think that it's that one of my biggest lessons would be it's not just about the artistic. So, you know, put all the time and effort into developing your artistic side, and you'll probably do that anyway because that's probably what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
But actually, if you want to really succeed and be able to work in lots of different settings, it's worth paying attention and putting some development into the relational side and the bit that allows you to work really well with other people and to recognize people's differences. I think that's really critical.
Yeah. When you're thinking about a piece of work that you've had some kind of hand in creating, how do you judge the quality and success of that work? Is there a criteria that you use? Because at the end of the day, everybody can really enjoy something, but it's not necessarily a sign of success that it's enjoyable. Ideally, they will enjoy the process. But what is your success criteria for quality work?
I think it's an interesting one because to me that's there's an internal question there. So how do we internally measure quality? What does that mean? And then actually what are the external factors that we have to consider? And for us principally, if I talk about the external factors first, that's largely on what do our funders consider to be quality? So with those sorts of things, we've got Arts Council quality principles for work with children and young people. So when we apply for funding, for example, we'll always benchmark those plans against those quality principles and say, these are the ones that we're focusing on, or building on some evaluation from a previous project, we might say that because we evaluate against them as well with the participants that we work with. For example, we might say, okay, well, we recognize that we did score really highly in, I don't know, artistic quality, for example, but we maybe didn't score so highly on like personal development. And so therefore we'll deliberately say we're going to do that more in the next project. And so we can show that sort of continuum and that learning. The Arts Council quality metrics, generally, I haven't even looked at really. I mean, I had a skim through and went, nope, not touching them. And I think the backlash against those is for good reason, for all the reasons that you've just said. You know, how do you decide what that quality is? But then I suppose it is that synergy between the external expectations and the internal expectations. And for us, it's about benchmarking against those 4 values that I mentioned. So contributing, I've mentioned already. Growing is our second value. That's about ongoing learning. That's everything. So that's as an organisation, that's for us as the practitioners within the organisation, and that's for everybody that we work with. So partners, participants, and so on. So every stakeholder that we have. With others is the other piece, and that is about collaboration, basically. And then you can see how these link together. So with others, you can be growing together, growing in that journey, sharing practice, and so on. And then the final one is as ourselves, and that's about authenticity. So that's about going, who are we as an organisation? How do we want to position ourselves? What's important to us? And being crystal clear about that, so that we can then judge and tell other people actually why these things are quality, why these things are important. But as ourselves also is about every individual that works with us being free to be themselves, to not have to come in and put on a front as so much of us feel compelled to do a lot of the time. Because that we know, if I come back to psychology, sociology and all those things, we know that the more that we're layering on in terms of what we're trying to portray to other people, the less able we are to be creative, for example, because there's a vulnerability that's inherent in all forms of creativity. And the more that we can allow people to drop all that armor and drop all those things that they put on themselves, the more we can get from them and the more they can get from us. And those are the really important benchmarks of quality for me and for us.
You're working with people who are at a very important time in their development. And I know from my experience, when I was a young teenager, I was involved with the Backworth Drama Centre, as it was in the 80s, the early 80s. And we did shows, and we took them to the Edinburgh Festival, and we did all kinds of things. But for me, it was my first opportunity to be with people who I wouldn't necessarily meet at school, who had interests similar to mine, and to learn about creativity, and not just drama, but also things like music and comedy and, you know, all sorts of things from a group of people who were like me and not necessarily the people who were in my class at school, who are my immediate peer group. It was a vital time for me, and I count that as you know, where my creative development really started when I was 12 or 13. So, you know, what sort of stories do you see in the development of the people in your group that make you think, yeah, I think we're getting it right? You know, that's such a valuable thing that we're doing. How do you kind of, you know, judge that type of reaction?
I think it's capturing the kind of myriad of different responses to those things. So we've always been very clear and explicit that we're not about training people to go into the profession necessarily. Although for those that do show an interest in going into the creative industries, we'll do everything that we can to help support them to do that. But I think, like you say, it's that thing about supporting them through that period of really significant development, actually, in anyone's life. So that point of teenager and growing into a young adult, especially, is that real kind of turning point in someone's life where they're discovering who they are, and they're forced to make a lot of decisions about their futures that actually really no one should be made to make at that age. And it's about supporting them through that. So in terms of capturing it, we talk to them. I mean, I know it sounds simplistic in one sense, but actually it's to understand. We talk to them at different stages. So we've got young people now who joined, you know, when I was running that thing in the village hall by myself in 2012, we've got young people who joined us at that stage who were sort of 9 or 10, who were now sort of 18, 19 and so on. Who are now moving on. So they're moving on from us and they're moving on to the next stages. And actually each one of those has got a really unique story to tell. So I might have one young person, for example, who struggled socially, really found it difficult to make friends. And because of the environment that we were creating, where they didn't feel compelled to be anything other than themselves and were completely accepted for that, it allowed them to build up confidence in themselves. It allowed them to really discover who they were and process all the emotions of growing up in that safe environment. And as a result, it helped them make some decisions to form better relationships with people, and then make the choices that take them into where they are next. For some of them, it's about developing skills that translate to professional development. So we've got one young person, for example, who joined us when she was, I want to say 12, and she's now 19, and she is an apprentice solicitor, and she's also a trustee on our board. Which is an amazing sort of journey. And she talks very fluently about the confidence that it gave her, the ability to share her ideas and to listen to the ideas of other people, to work creatively and collaboratively, to think critically about things, to problem solve, to work through challenges, and actually to have a sort of accountable, and well, like a sense of accountability.
Mm.
So the way that you work, if you work collectively, we all share responsibility for the outcome of whatever it is that we're jointly working towards. And actually, for anybody, not just young people, that's a really important lesson to learn, because it's so easy when things go wrong to just go, well, wasn't my fault. It's them, it's there. And actually, for us all to develop those skills, I think it benefits all of us. And now she's discovering that in a professional capacity. I mean, I could talk for England about these kind of stories, but
Yeah.
this is what we're seeing. And I think what's lovely is that you get those stories of young people that have been with us for a number of years, and where it's working with us has become a really important part of their lives. But actually, when you know you're getting it right, is when you've got a young person who comes to one or two of your sessions, and possibly just, you know, that stepping over the threshold when you're 12 years old is a massive deal. And if they're brave enough to do that, and they manage to do that, and then they find an environment that really holds them and supports them and celebrates them, we get feedback that after a couple of sessions, people are going, oh my God, she's had the best time. She's never experienced anything like this, and all of that sort of stuff. That to me is when you know that you're getting it right, because this stuff shouldn't take 5 years to have an impact. It should start to have an impact after like a session.
Absolutely. We have to get on to the topic of what's happened in the last couple of weeks.
Yes, let's.
Because you know, you've been devising a new piece, and you were all set to tour that, and then the coronavirus stepped in and changed not just your plans, but those of virtually everyone in the world. How are you reacting to what's going on at the minute? Are you staying positive?
Oh, most certainly. Most certainly. I think I've really reflected in the last week or so, and I cannot believe that this has all happened so fast. You know, we had a team meeting this morning, and we looked back at the agenda board on Trello that we use to keep track of things, at things that were from 2 weeks ago. And it just feels like another age altogether. It's really strange. Yeah. But what I've really tried to do in the last couple of weeks is to instill some steadiness within the team, and that's not just our core team, but that is all of the associate practitioners that we work with, and the participants as well. Because I think that's been really important, because this has all happened so fast, and everybody's reeling from it. There was a real lack of clarity and decision making coming from government and so on, in terms of what we needed to do, what the actual dangers were, and all that sort of stuff. And I think, unfortunately, that was whipping up even more panic. And I really wanted within our own organisation to say, right, okay, well, let's look at things objectively, and let's look at what we need to do now. So what is important to us? Let's root in those values that we're talking about. And make some action plans, so that then everybody had a sense of something tangible that they could attach themselves to. So whether that is going, oh my God, like everything's changed, like what do I do now? How do I do my job now? It's going, right, well then let's look at that and form that into a series of tasks, so that you go, great, I can do that. I know I can do that. And immediately someone feels calmer and steadier, and then we can keep momentum going. And for me, the focus within all this has been the needs of the people involved, and that's everybody. So that's a good example of how we've worked as a staff team, is really pull together to make some decisions where we've needed to give that certainty when there's been a lot of uncertainty swirling around. And then similarly look at actually how we're looking after people's emotional needs. So sometimes that is going, do you know what? Like, forget work for a minute. Let's just talk for as long as it needs to get all this out, to share how we're feeling, so that nobody's having to carry that as an individual. And then what I found is that the more that we've done that, the more we've gone, right, now everybody's back and they're ready. They're ready for action. They're ready to do what we need to do. And that's been really important. Now, you mentioned the show that we had to cancel. Now, that was horrid. It really was. So this was relentless. And the irony is that a big part of this show is about, for teenagers and actually for all of us, the hamster wheel that we're on, and the constant churn of do more, be better, be bigger, be bolder, be this, be that. And isn't it interesting how then the world is almost like not ground to a halt, but it's just, you know, it's like a bomb's been dropped in the middle of all that.
Changed, yes.
Absolutely. But because we had this company of young people and the artists that have been working with them, who'd obviously been going through a creative process and were due to start their tour, you know, a couple of days after really all this started to hit properly, we wanted to go, how are we looking after them in that? So we made the decision to have a final rehearsed performance that we arranged to have filmed as well. So all of their work was then documented. So it felt precious, and it felt that we were really looking after that and valuing it for what it was and all the work that had gone into it.
Yeah.
But it also gave them a chance to celebrate, a chance to celebrate what they'd achieved and what they'd made together, because it was a really great piece of work. And it will get another outing. We've already decided that. But to be able to celebrate that, but actually also to be able to mourn what they'd lost together, that was really important. So we wanted to obviously keep the numbers down of people, so we kept it as a closed set, I suppose. There was a number of the team that were there watching it. Rachel Horton, who works with us in a marketing capacity, bought this amazing, massive chocolate cake that Thought Foundation prepared for them.
Saw that.
It was insane. It was huge. Like, it was enormous. And then after they'd done their performance, they gave out, the directors gave the kids all cards telling them just how well they'd done, and individually telling them what they'd done really well and the special contribution that they'd made as an individual to the whole collective process. And that's really important. And I guess those sorts of things embody the way that we've responded to it. So we're still going through that process of just dealing with it all and processing kind of, okay, what does this mean now? What are the implications? But also trying to be as proactive as we can in all of this. So it's like, okay, great. We know what has to have a full stop next to it now. And we have no choice in most of those things. But then what can we do? How can we use all of the creative skills that we've got to rethink and repurpose? And what we're starting to find already is that we're discovering things that we probably wouldn't have discovered if this hadn't happened, if I'm honest, because you get a little bit blinkered, don't you? You think about things in a certain way, you go about things in a certain way, and you might try new things and things develop, of course they do. But when something is entirely turned on its head, whilst emotionally that's tough, creatively that can be really exciting.
Yeah. And I think that's a very good point on which to say thank you very much indeed. It's been great to talk to you. I've seen you and worked with you on a number of occasions, but we rarely get the chance to have a proper chat. So it's been lovely
to have a proper
chat with you.
Yeah, definitely.
All the very best. People can keep in touch with what you're up to through the Mortal Fools Facebook page.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. So we are Mortal Fools UK on all of the social media channels, so you can look us up. And we're starting to put out content as well that can support other people during this time as well. That's something we do really, really well. And we don't just want to do that internally. So we're trying to put out resources that we hope that can help people, particularly manage the emotional fallout that everybody's going through, whatever their context, whatever they're in. So hopefully people find that useful.
Good. I hope they check it out and have a very positive time. Look after yourself. Stay indoors for now. And
likewise.
We'll see you on the side of all this.
All right, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.